I teach in digital sociology here. I call myself a data sociologist because I'm really interested in data, and I'm interested in it sociologically. So I want to explain to you what I mean by that. But first, the term itself is something you've probably come across either in the popular media, in academia certainly, by governments or by corporations. Basically, it usually refers to this big volume of data that's being compiled every day, and is happening right now if you've got a smartphone. It's collecting data at this moment. We're all being turned into data, if you will, in ever more exhaustive ways. So when we interact, exchange, take actions through the internet or through our mobile phones and our tablets, our computers, we browse, we shop, we do all these things, we are generating digital traces or digital data. And that's what has come to be called big data. But instead of focusing on volume, we sociologically focus on how does it happen? What goes into making big data, and how can we think about that sociologically? The argument is that big data just doesn't happen. It just isn't a natural phenomenon, a raw thing that some people refer to it as. It's actually the product of a lot of social and technical practices, including us as people who act through the internet, for example, and are part of and are inside of the making of big data. So when we talk about big data, it's about how does it happen? And that's something that I have done in one project that I recently completed. And it was about engaging with different practitioners who work with and generate big data to talk about their practices and how they come to make these large data sets, and how we might think about the kinds of issues that arise when we understand this as a complex achievement of a phenomenon that doesn't just happen, but takes a lot of actors and technologies and people and things. So this word cloud, which you've probably seen before, it's a real common tool that people use to take a large corpus of text and to summarize it in terms of word frequencies. Well, I took my project and I summarized it into word frequencies to think about what were the main ideas and things that came out of this talk of big data. And you can almost see here, but not very well because I didn't get the lighting right when I prepared this slide. But we talked about practitioners and research and their practices of producing information, their metrics, but also how we were working in a collaborative way to sort of think about these things. But one of the big things that came out, as you can see here, is this notion of social data. That for the practitioners, all data, especially for a sociologist, is social. And we wanted to understand how we might think about that sociologically. Well, one way that I think about it sociologically is through a concept called attachment, about how all data has us attached to it in some way. If you followed what I just said about what's our actions, our interactions, our transactions with people and with things that create big data, then we're always in some way attached to it. And it's thinking about those attachments as being really critical to understand the making of big data is one way that we talk about it and can think about it. But the other side of attachments is that we also get attached socially to others through our digital traces and the data that we generate. For example, if you use social networking sites, you're producing some digital data that can then be used to draw you as part of a social network. And then you get connected to a bunch of other people within that social network and are seen as constituting a particular kind of group. But it's through that attachment to data that you get attached to other people. Or for people who work in genomics would say, if we have your genome, we can attach you to other people by your common genomic sequence and create new biosocialities from that attachment. So there's different ways that new groupings are socially being created through the kinds of data that we are generating. Another one that's quite controversial is how the different data traces that we produce can be joined up to create profiles of us as people. So our transactions, let's say, our social media activities, our government interactions or interactions with government, the data we generate, could be joined up together to create profiles of us as a person, as maybe a good consumer, a credit risk, a possible terrorist in these days apparently, because a lot of actions of security agencies involve joining up data to create a profile of a potential criminal. In those ways, new identities and group formations are also happening. So those are just some examples of how we can sociologically think about data as not just a thing out there, but something that's very much a social phenomenon, but then is also coming back to influence how we are governed, how we're identified, and how we're known in those kinds of ways I talked about profiling. Now that's just one kind of approach. There are certainly other ways that one can study it sociologically. Some people study, for example, social networking as new ways that we socialize, or that we create new socialities together, and a new form of sociality being done through the way we use social media, for example. Others also look at issues of rights that emerge when we become now or start to talk about ourselves as digital citizens. What rights do we have to our digital traces? What rights do we have to contest how that data is being used? And again, if you have a smartphone, you have a lot of data that's being, as some people say, hoovered up by different interests and being used in ways that perhaps you're not aware. So these kinds of data rights and privacy issues are also very important in terms of the kinds of sociological analyses that people are doing. But I think that gives you a taste or a flavor of the kinds of possibilities that there are in order to do some research in sociology. Those are the ideas I think that you can work with. So I'll stop there because I've been given my signal. And